Welcome to Veiled Narrative Stories, where hidden emotions and untold journeys come alive. Today's tale is about love, fate, and the unexpected turns that bind two souls forever. It was an elegant charity gala, the kind of event where chandeliers sparkled like constellations and every conversation carried the weight of power. Amelia was there only because her best friend had begged her to come. She was simple, quiet, a woman who preferred books over ballrooms. But fate had its own plans. Looking for her table, she misread the number and unknowingly sat at the grandest one in the hall, reserved for the host himself, a billionaire named Adrian Knight. He was the kind of man everyone noticed instantly: sharp suit, sharper gaze, a man accustomed to control. Amelia, nervous but unaware of her mistake, introduced herself politely. Instead of dismissing her, Adrian studied her with intrigue. She didn't look at him like the others did, with greed, fear, or admiration. She looked at him like he was just a man. That alone was enough to shake him. Throughout the night, Adrian refused to let her move. When the organizers tried to correct the error, he silenced them with a simple wave. "She belongs here," he said firmly. Amelia felt trapped, yet strangely safe under his commanding presence. Conversations turned into laughter, laughter into confessions. Amelia shared stories of her struggles, her dreams, and her love for the simple joys of life. Adrian, who had lived surrounded by opulence but drowned in loneliness, found himself captivated. For the first time in years, someone saw beyond his billions. The world whispered, the cameras clicked, and jealousy brewed among the glamorous guests. But Adrian didn't care. By the end of the evening, one thing was clear: he wasn't going to let her slip away. In the days that followed, Adrian sent flowers, handwritten letters, and invitations. Amelia hesitated. She wasn't part of his world. But every time she looked into his eyes, she saw not the billionaire, but the man who had chosen her in a room full of people. And so, what began as a mistake at the wrong table became the beginning of a love story neither of them could ever walk away from. Life often plays its most extraordinary tricks in the simplest of ways. That night, Amelia had no idea that a single wrong turn could change the course of her destiny forever. The charity gala was an event of grandeur, an ocean of silk gowns, glittering jewels, and champagne glasses that sparkled under the brilliance of golden chandeliers. It was a world Amelia did not belong to, or so she thought. She had borrowed a soft satin dress from her best friend, one that clung just enough to highlight her delicate figure, yet spoke of modesty rather than extravagance. She wasn't there to shine, she was there merely to accompany, to observe from the corners. The ballroom buzzed with the chatter of the wealthy and the powerful. Names with influence, faces recognized by magazines, men and women who measured life by stock values and luxury yachts. Amelia, in her quiet grace, searched for her place. She clutched her small purse nervously, her eyes sweeping the hall until she found the number she believed to be hers. With hesitant steps, she approached and took her seat, exhaling in relief as though she had finally found a safe island in a sea of sophistication. But what Amelia did not know was that the table she had chosen was not hers. It was the center of attention, the host's table, reserved for the untouchable, the elite, the most powerful man in the room, Adrian Knight. When he arrived, a hush rippled through the gala. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that whispered of Italian craftsmanship. His presence was magnetic, the kind that made conversations pause and eyes linger. Adrian was not just wealthy, he was legendary, the sort of man whispered about in business schools and envied in boardrooms. As he approached his table, his sharp eyes instantly caught Amelia sitting there. For the briefest second, her presence felt like a mistake that needed to be corrected. The organizers rushed forward, whispers filling the air, ready to remove her with embarrassed apologies. But then, something unusual happened. Adrian raised his hand, stopping them in their tracks. His gaze lingered on Amelia, her innocent confusion, her nervous yet graceful composure. She didn't fawn over him, didn't bat her eyelashes or force conversation the way others always did. She simply sat there, trying her best to fit in, as though she belonged to a world she had never touched. Instead of asking her to leave, Adrian did the unthinkable. His lips curved into the faintest of smiles, and in a voice that carried authority yet unexpected warmth, he said, "She stays. She belongs here." The entire hall turned in surprise. Whispers grew louder. Who was this woman? Why had Adrian Knight, the untouchable billionaire, claimed her place at his table as though it were destiny itself? Amelia's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to protest, to apologize for her mistake, but the intensity in his gaze held her still. It was not arrogance, it was fascination, curiosity, a man used to control, suddenly drawn to something beyond his command. Throughout the dinner, Amelia sat amid glittering diamonds and expensive laughter. Yet it was Adrian who made her feel like the only person in the room. Every time she tried to fade into the background, he pulled her back into the conversation with subtle gestures and questions. She spoke hesitantly at first, her voice trembling, but soon her sincerity began to shine. She talked about her love for literature, her belief in kindness, her struggles to make ends meet in a world that often overlooked people like her. Adrian listened. Really listened. In a life full of numbers, contracts and masked smiles, her words felt like music. For the first time in years, he wasn't the billionaire at the head of the table. He was just a man leaning closer, captivated by a woman who had stumbled into his world by accident. Every detail of that evening was painted in romance. The flicker of candlelight reflected in crystal glasses, the orchestra playing a gentle melody in the background, the hush of curiosity as others watched them. But for Amelia and Adrian the world faded away. What remained was a spark neither could ignore. By the time dessert was served, Amelia realized she had committed more than a social misstep. She had stepped into a story far greater than she could have imagined. A mistake had placed her at the wrong table, but fate whispered that it was exactly where she was meant to be. And Adrian, he knew it already. From the moment she looked at him not as a billionaire, but as a man, he had decided. This was no accident. This was destiny dressed as chance. And he wasn't going to let her slip away. Adrian Knight had lived a life most men only dreamed of. His empire stretched across continents, towers with his name etched into skylines, yachts anchored in private marinas, and a portfolio that made nations court his favor. He was a man who held power in the palm of his hand, who could silence boardrooms with a single glance. And yet with all that wealth, with all that control, his world was a gilded cage, grand, but hollow. Women had sat across from him countless times before, dazzling in diamonds and practiced charm. They admired his fortune, they desired his name, but never once did they truly see him. That night, however, was different. Amelia was not supposed to be there. She was a mistake, an intruder into the choreography of perfection that surrounded him. But perhaps that was why she fascinated him so deeply. Because she wasn't choreographed at all. She wasn't trying to impress, wasn't wearing the armor of luxury or the masks of society. She sat nervously, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her borrowed satin dress, her eyes downcast yet shimmering with quiet courage. And when she finally looked up at him, it wasn't with awe or greed. It was with honesty. That single glance ignited something inside him. Adrian had always prided himself on reading people in an instant. It was a skill that had made him untouchable in business and undefeatable in negotiation. But with Amelia, he couldn't read her. She wasn't predictable. She wasn't impressed by the weight of his last name or the empire behind him. She didn't lean in to flatter, didn't search for ways to make herself unforgettable. Instead, she spoke softly of her world, the books she adored, the struggles she faced working 2 jobs, the little moments of joy she found in a sunrise or a shared smile. To everyone else it was ordinary. To Adrian it was extraordinary. The gala swirled around them with music, laughter, and golden light, but Adrian only heard her. When she laughed, genuinely and without calculation, it stirred something in him that wealth could never purchase. Every detail about her became vivid. The delicate curve of her lips when she smiled, the spark of fire in her eyes when she talked about fairness, the graceful way she carried herself despite feeling out of place. For the first time in years, Adrian found himself leaning forward, listening intently, memorizing her words. It unsettled him, this sudden pull, as though gravity itself had shifted. Women had chased him all his life, and yet here he was, chasing a truth he had never known existed. The fascination was not merely physical, it was spiritual. She embodied everything he had forgotten in the pursuit of wealth, simplicity, sincerity, humanity. She didn't want to own his world, she wanted to understand it. And the more she spoke, the more he realized that she wasn't the one out of place. He was. He had been lost in a world of excess, and she had walked in like a compass pointing him back to himself. He watched how she looked at the hall, not with envy but with wonder. She wasn't calculating the cost of the chandeliers or the value of the gowns. She was absorbing the beauty, savoring it, as though she knew it was a rare moment she might never experience again. That humility, that quiet gratitude, pierced through the armor he had built around his heart. The more she tried to excuse herself, to correct her mistake of sitting at his table, the more determined he became. No, he would not let her go. There was something about her presence that filled the emptiness in his life. Something about her innocence that made the room brighter than all the crystal and gold around them. When the others at the table asked Amelia shallow questions meant to humiliate her, Adrian noticed her cheeks flush with embarrassment. But instead of mocking her, as society so often did, he defended her. With a sharp remark cloaked in charm, he silenced their laughter and turned the attention back to her, making her feel seen, valued. And the moment she whispered a shy thank you, his heart tightened in a way he hadn't felt in years. That evening, Adrian Knight, the billionaire untouchable, the man who had mastered empires, fell captive. Captive to the authenticity of a woman who hadn't even meant to sit at his table. His fascination wasn't fleeting, it was an awakening. In a life of contracts and deals, Amelia was the first promise that felt unbreakable. She reminded him of the man he could be, not the billionaire, not the legend, but the human beneath it all. And as the night stretched on, Adrian silently made a vow to himself. Fate had brought her to him in the most unlikely of ways, and he would not let the world steal her away. For once in his life, Adrian Knight was no longer the one in control. He was enchanted, fascinated, and irrevocably drawn into the orbit of a woman who sat at his table by mistake, but who was destined to stay in his heart forever. The days following the gala were unlike anything Amelia had ever known. For her, the night at the wrong table should have ended as a beautiful memory, a fleeting encounter she would someday recall with a smile. But Adrian Knight had made sure that it did not end. He had her name, he had her number, and more than anything, he had made a vow to himself: she would not disappear from his life. Adrian's world was a kingdom built on steel and glass. His days began with jet engines roaring above private runways, with boardrooms lined with polished mahogany, and with decisions that shifted the balance of global markets. He was accustomed to a rhythm of life where time was money, and money was everything. And yet, for the first time, Adrian found himself slowing down, making time for Amelia. But Amelia's world could not have been more different. She lived in a modest apartment with peeling paint and mismatched furniture that held more sentimental value than price. Her mornings began with rushing to work, with coffee brewed in a chipped mug, with worries about rent and bills that never seemed to end. She knew the value of every dollar, because every dollar had to be earned, stretched, and protected. When Adrian's black limousine pulled up outside her street for the first time, the contrast became painfully clear. Children on bicycles stopped to stare. Neighbors peeked through their curtains, and Amelia's heart raced with embarrassment. She wasn't ready for this kind of attention. She wasn't sure she was ready for him. The clash of their worlds began subtly. Adrian wanted to sweep her into his lifestyle. Dinners in Michelin-starred restaurants where waiters whispered in French, weekends on yachts where the sea stretched endlessly, gifts wrapped in velvet boxes that gleamed brighter than starlight. To him it was natural. To her it was overwhelming. At first, Amelia resisted. "I can't accept this," she whispered the first time he placed a diamond bracelet on her wrist. Her hands trembled as though the weight of it was too heavy. Adrian only smiled, gently fastening the clasp as he replied, "You deserve more than the world has ever given you." But Amelia's pride and her simplicity fought against the luxury. She didn't want to be defined by what she wore on her wrist or the car she arrived in. She wanted to be seen for herself, just as she had seen Adrian, not as the billionaire, but as the man. And yet, no matter how different their lives were, the connection between them deepened. Adrian admired her refusal to be dazzled, her quiet strength that made her walk into his towering world with grace instead of submission. Amelia, though torn by the grandeur surrounding him, couldn't deny the gentleness she saw in his gestures, the way he listened, the way he noticed details no one else would. Still, the outside world was not kind. The society women, draped in gowns worth more than Amelia's entire savings, whispered behind her back. They mocked her simplicity, questioned her worth, and spread rumors like poison in crystal flutes. Amelia felt their eyes on her at every event Adrian brought her to, sharp with judgment, cold with disdain. Adrian noticed, and while his instinct was to shield her, to fight for her with the force of his power, Amelia begged him not to. "If I am to be by your side, I have to face them," she told him softly one evening, her hand resting over his. That quiet strength melted something in him. She was not fragile glass to be protected. She was fire, strong enough to withstand the storm of his world. But even within their private moments, the clash remained. Adrian wanted to give her a life without worry, but Amelia feared losing herself in his luxury. She wanted him, not his empire. She wanted to build a love not on diamonds and silk, but on trust and truth, and that truth at times frightened her, because she wondered if love alone could truly bridge such different worlds. One night, standing on the balcony of his penthouse overlooking a city that glittered beneath them, Amelia voiced her fear. "We're too different, Adrian. You belong to a world that worships power. I belong to one that struggles for survival. How can we ever meet in the middle?" Adrian turned to her, the city lights reflecting in his eyes, and whispered, "Because you are the first person who has ever made me want to leave my world behind. And for you, I would." That night, beneath the stars and the skyline, their worlds collided not with destruction, but with the possibility of creation. The clash of wealth and simplicity, power and humility, became the very force that bound them together. For in the end, what mattered was not the distance between their lives, but the bridge they were willing to build to reach each other. From the very beginning, Amelia had known she would never fit easily into Adrian Knight's world. His circles were filled with heirs and heiresses who had been raised on privilege, who moved through banquets and boardrooms, as though they had been born wearing crowns. They judged not by kindness, but by lineage, not by character, but by net worth. And so when Adrian appeared at their side with Amelia, a woman from no dynasty, no pedigree, no gilded last name, whispers spread like wildfire. At gala dinners, their eyes lingered on her dress, searching for the label. At charity balls, their voices dipped into mocking tones as they questioned who she was and what she wanted. They called her ordinary, and in their world, that was the sharpest insult. But Adrian was not a man who bowed to society. He was a man who had built his empire by bending the world to his will, and when it came to Amelia, he was more defiant than ever. At a winter ball, when a woman draped in diamonds leaned too close and asked with a smug smile, "Tell me, Adrian, how long do you think this one will last?" he responded with a single cutting sentence that silenced the entire table, "As long as my heartbeat continues." The room froze, stunned into silence. Amelia, cheeks burning, lowered her gaze, but Adrian gently lifted her chin, his eyes locked with hers as though she were the only one who mattered. It was a declaration, not just to her, but to the world. She was not a passing amusement. She was his choice, and he would stand by it. Each time society tried to tear her down, Adrian raised her higher. He invited her to his meetings, sat her beside him at dinners, introduced her as though she were already the queen of his empire. When photographers swarmed, he never let go of her hand, even when Amelia begged him to avoid the attention. He wanted the world to know she was his and he was hers. But Amelia was not without strength of her own. Though the whispers stung, she held herself with quiet dignity. She never lashed out, never tried to imitate the glamorous women around her. She remained true to herself, simple, sincere, radiant in her authenticity, and in doing so, she unsettled those who thought wealth was the only currency of worth. There was a night, however, that would test them both. It was a charity auction, hosted in a hall so opulent it seemed carved from a dream. Gilded ceilings, velvet drapes, and crystal lights that rained diamonds onto the crowd. Adrian escorted Amelia in, her gown a soft shade of midnight blue, chosen not for its designer label, but because it made her eyes glow like stars. Yet the moment they entered, the murmur of disapproval filled the air. She heard the laughter masked as polite conversation, the comparisons whispered behind raised champagne glasses. One woman, bold, cruel, let her words cut loudly enough to pierce Amelia's heart. "She's a mistake. She doesn't belong here." Adrian's eyes sharpened. He stood, tall and unyielding, and with his voice resonant enough to command silence across the hall, he declared, "You're right. She doesn't belong here. None of you deserve to share a room with her, and yet she chose to sit beside me. That makes me the luckiest man alive." Gasps rippled through the room. Amelia's eyes filled with tears, not of shame, but of love. Because in that moment, Adrian Knight, the billionaire who could have bowed to society's expectations, had instead shattered them with pride. Defiance became their bond. Together they walked through rooms where they were unwelcome, and together they stood unshaken. The more society resisted, the more Adrian drew Amelia closer. He refused to bend to their scorn, and she refused to let their poison change who she was. Their love became a symbol, whispered about in envy and disbelief. They were not just two people in love. they were proof that authenticity could triumph over arrogance, that sincerity could outshine wealth. The photographs that appeared in magazines no longer showed a billionaire and a girl out of place. They showed a man and woman who looked at each other, as though the rest of the world didn't exist. For Adrian, Amelia was no longer a guest at the wrong table. She was his table, his anchor, his only truth. And he would defy the entire world, if it meant keeping her. In luxury halls and glittering banquets, among whispers and stares, they wrote their story not with ink, but with defiance. Their love was no longer a secret slip of fate. It was a challenge to society itself, and they met it hand in hand, unyielding, unstoppable. And for the first time in her life, Amelia realized that she was no longer afraid. For what could the judgment of society mean, when the man beside her was willing to stand against it all? The storm of whispers, the mocking stares, the cruel judgment of high society, all of it had tested them. Yet, despite the endless attempts to separate them, Adrian and Amelia remained side by side. What began as a mistake at a gala table had grown into something unshakable, something that glittered far brighter than chandeliers or diamond rings. Adrian Knight, the man whose life had been measured in numbers and prestige, finally understood a truth that even billions could not buy: love. Not the fleeting kind whispered in shadows, not the transactional kind that moved in his social circles, but love in its purest, most unshakable form. Amelia had taught him that. She had stepped into his gilded world and refused to be blinded by it. She had looked past the fortune, the mansions, the power, and seen only the man beneath. For Amelia, the journey had not been simple. Each day she asked herself if she belonged. Each night she wondered if their love could survive the chasm between his empire and her modest world. Yet every time she looked into Adrian's eyes, she saw no empire, no billions. She saw a man who reached for her hand in crowded rooms, who listened to her dreams as if they were royal decrees, who silenced gossip with pride rather than shame. And she knew, no matter the doubts, that love had already chosen for them. Their moments together became a mosaic of luxury and simplicity blended into harmony. There was the night Adrian took her to Paris, not for the fashion shows or the champagne towers, but to a quiet rooftop overlooking the city, where the Eiffel Tower glittered like 1,000 diamonds. He wrapped a coat around her shoulders, not a designer label, but soft and warm, chosen only because he knew she often forgot to carry one. They ate fresh croissants from a paper bag, her laughter echoing against the skyline. He could have reserved the entire tower for her, but she had made it clear what she wanted wasn't grandeur but him. And then, there was the evening Amelia invited him into her modest apartment. The curtains were thin, the paint was chipped, and the sofa sagged under its years of use. Yet Adrian sat there as though it were a throne. He held her close in that tiny living room, the faint scent of lavender filling the air, and whispered, "This is more beautiful than any palace I own. Because this is where you are." It was then that Amelia realized Adrian was no longer trying to bring her into his world. He was learning to live in hers. Their love had found a balance, a meeting place between luxury and simplicity, between billions and humility, between two hearts that beat as one. Society could not understand it. The press still speculated. The elite still whispered, but Adrian and Amelia had stopped listening. They no longer cared about fitting into molds or silencing critics. Their love had become a fortress, built not of marble or gold, but of trust and devotion. One evening at another grand gala where Amelia once again stood beside him, Adrian surprised the world. As the orchestra swelled and the chandeliers bathed the hall in golden light, he rose to make a speech. His voice carried over the crowd with the same authority that had once made men bend, but this time it was softer, more human. "I have spent my life chasing power, building walls of glass and steel, earning fortunes that can buy almost anything. But tonight I stand before you to tell you this: none of it means a thing. Not the billions, not the empires, not the towers with my name. Because the only thing worth holding on to is her." He turned, his gaze finding Amelia, who froze as the crowd gasped. He took her hand, lifted it to his lips, and kissed it gently. "She sat at my table by mistake. But I swear to you, she will never leave my side by choice. She is my world now, and no wealth, no power, no status can compare." The hall erupted, some in applause, some in disbelief. But Amelia's tears shimmered brighter than the diamonds around her. In that moment, every doubt she had carried melted away. Adrian had not just chosen her, he had chosen love beyond status. That night, the whispers of society finally faded into irrelevance. What remained was the story of a man and a woman who had defied every expectation, every barrier, every difference, and won. And so, their love became legend. Not because he was a billionaire, not because she was an ordinary woman, but because together they proved a timeless truth, that when love is real, it is the great equalizer. It does not care for wealth or poverty, power or obscurity. It only cares for hearts that beat in unison. Adrian Knight, the billionaire untouchable, had found his queen not in castles of gold, but in the quiet strength of a woman who sat at the wrong table. And Amelia, the woman who thought she did not belong, had discovered that she had always been exactly where she was meant to be, in the arms of the man who refused to let her go. Their story was no longer about a mistake. It was about destiny, a destiny that whispered, against all odds, love is greater than status, stronger than wealth, and more eternal than power. What began as a simple mistake, Amelia sitting at the wrong table, turned into the greatest twist of destiny. She walked into a world of chandeliers and whispered judgments, yet never lost the quiet strength that defined her. Adrian, the billionaire who had everything, discovered that what he truly needed was not wealth, not admiration, but a woman who saw the man behind the empire. They clashed, they endured society's cruel words, but through it all they chose each other. Their love did not bow to status, nor did it break under pressure. Instead, it rose higher, proving that authenticity and devotion shine brighter than diamonds. Amelia found her place not because of the riches surrounding Adrian, but because he refused to let her go. And Adrian, for the first time in his life, learned that the greatest fortune a man could ever hold is love, the kind that defies the world and rewrites destiny. So, their story stands as a timeless reminder. Sometimes the wrong table leads us to the right person, and sometimes love finds us where we least expect it, beyond power, beyond status, and beyond every obstacle.